right, here's our last speaker. I'm just going to read a little introduction about A.J. Hendershot. A.J. works with the Missouri Department of Conservation as a regional supervisor in the education branch. In his job, he has the opportunity to work with many conservation issues, including rare and declining species. The Ozark Chinquapin is a plant that he has taken particular interest personally and professionally. He volunteers his time with the Ozark Chinquapin Foundation and is currently the vice president and has a Chinquapin orchard planted on his family property. He contributes to the OCF website and OCF Facebook, and AJ enjoys learning about history, and with any facts he uncovers about historic use of his plants, he endeavors to make ethically sourced reproductions. So without further ado, here is A.J. Hendershot.
Thank you. All right, when I give a general talk about the Ozark Chinquapin Foundation, I will tell my audience I have two goals. My first goal is to convince you that this tree is worth saving. My second goal is to convince you that you can do something about it. With this audience in here, I really don't think those should be my goals. So I'm going to take a further step and say, I want to convince you this tree is even more valuable than you thought it was. And at the end, I'll see how I did, and you can tell me honestly, and it's not going to hurt my feelings. But that's my goal. I also want to make sure that you understand that what I try to do with a lot of the historic work that I do, it's one thing to say, oh, this tree used to be used for this. It's another thing when you can go up and put your hands on it. There's something about that tactile opportunity that changes people's attitudes. And I'll give you an example of how that worked with me. Stephen Bost gave me a little Chinquapin nut, said, crack that needle. My immediate response was, we need to save this tree. There's something about a reaction that comes from being able to interact with an object. So that's what I'm doing here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what to expect from this particular presentation. First off, I'm going to cover why Chinquapins for tanning to make leather. Why in the world would I even choose that? Next, I want to talk about tannins. What are they and what am I trying to do with them? Next, I'm going to go over a veg tan overview. Veg tan means you're using plant material to tan your leather. I'm going to go over what that means. Then I'm going to talk about the Chinquapin experiment that I'm doing, which links back to why Chinquapins. And then when you hear me talk about, I'm going to breeze through the process. I'm going to go over the results and give you some tips. When I hit the tips portion, you know I'm about to wrap this up. Okay? So that's what's coming. All right. So here is a quote from Huntsville, Arkansas, in Madison County. This was back in 1949. Keep in mind that the Chinese chestnut blight has marched its path of death across the eastern United States. It has crossed the Mississippi River, and it is starting to get into the Ozarks. So they are losing their chestnut trees, which was a very popular and common source of tannin for tanning hides. Now I want you to notice the underlying portion of this. Somebody at a research laboratory says they analyzed samples of Ozark Chinquapin wood and bark and has found that as a source of tannin, a block of Chinquapin is practically the equivalent of chestnut. And they're referring to American chestnut. All right, this is a big deal because leather is very important. It always has been, always will be. All right, so I'm going to talk about what are tannins. Now, you've probably had the effect of tannins with maybe not knowing it. First of all, it's a very complex molecule. If you were looking at a chemistry diagram, it looks like a beehive cell almost. And it is a complex molecule that does a lot of things for the plant and for animals that get in contact with it. Tannins can be antioxidant, so it keeps oxygen from changing the molecules of things. It can be antimicrobial. I can leave a hide in tannin for months, and as long as that tannin content is strong, nothing will rot that hide, which is incredible to me. It is also anti-inflammatory, so if you had a moderate dose of tannins, it can help reduce inflammation. And it's anti-proliferate, which means it reduces cell growth. All right? Now, these are the kind of things that a plant will secrete to keep other animals from doing something to the plant. And it works very well. For example, how many of you here have ever tried to eat a persimmon and you found out it was a little too green? Okay, at that point, you have experienced tannins. You suck in your teeth. If you drink a lot of coffee, if you drink a lot of tea, there are tannins in both of those, and those bond with our teeth, and it stains our teeth. So we have experience with tannins, all right? It does make tea-colored water. If you go to a swamp and it looks like it's tea, it's because of the tannins from all the plant leaf litter and acorns. Now this picture is from Mingo National Wildlife Refuge. I was in the vehicle with somebody and I said, man, look at all that pollution. And I knew what they were going to think. They looked at all that black stuff and went, ooh, let's find out what that is. And I just smiled because the pollution is the dirt coming down the main ditch. The tannins are what was coming out of a wetland pool where it had been steeping a bunch of oak leaves and acorns. That's not pollution, that's just normal every year kind of a thing in October. Okay, so I want to talk about tannin types. I do not expect you to memorize this. I just want to make sure you understand there are two groups of tannins out there and which one I'm dealing with. There's hydrolyzable and condensed. These molecules are complex and they have different sizes. The big deal is the hydrolyzable has buff or tan colors. Some of them can be red, like the condensed will be, and some are even kind of a yellow. More color stable. What that means is when you have hydrolyzable hides that are tanned with that, you can leave it out in the sun, it's not going to be any darker, which is kind of cool. Whereas the condensed, it's going to change color in exposure to sunlight. The extracts come out very easily in water. When I cook hydrolyzable tannins, I don't want to go past 160 degrees. Now, if I'm going to do condensed tannins, I want to rolling boil. Okay, so I'm not going to do the same thing with these two different tannin types. You can make very soft leathers with a hydrolyzable tannin. It's a little tighter leather, something more like what you would use for a knife sheath or a gun holster or something like that, or a belt. It is much more astringent. One of the ways, I just recently taught a class and everybody was given a spoon. And they were to take a spoonful of this tea that was made from a hydrolyzable tannin and put it in their mouth. And the first response they get is, it's no big deal. Swish it around a little bit. As soon as you spit it out, the looks on their faces was horrible. Like, oh, what did you just convince me to do? And I did it too. But that's one way to say, I've tasted it, I get that reaction, I now know this is the bar of this Latana hide. If it's any less than that, like the taste of wine or your grandma's medicine that she gave you didn't know what was in it, okay, that is not strong enough to tan a hide. But there's another way to measure that. You don't have to take a teaspoonful unless you just want to do it like I did it. So it's also, it's going to cause pebbling of the surface, which means you're going to get little spots on it because it's astringent and it causes the hide to constrict. And then also it's a little slower tan. Okay, so I want you to know all that because when I'm looking at this, that's chestnuts, that's castanea. Everything in the genus castanea, chestnuts and Chinquapins, all have hydrolyzable tannins. So I'm going to get a product that I would expect it to be buff or tan color, and essentially a brown, which is what we have here. This is a very brown hide. If I brought in something with tan oak bark, it's going to be kind of a rusty red. Okay? All right, so I do want to compare and contrast. A lot of people, even if they're not into tanning, they know a little something about brain tanning. And here's a brain tan hide. I want you to notice that looks like, as I'm holding it just by a corner, it looks like a draped piece of flannel, right? It's very soft. All right, I'm going to hold this one up, which is a reasonably soft hide. Does it look like a piece of flannel? No. So when you compare brain tan to veg tan is a little tougher, a little stiffer, and it's not going to be as soft and drapey. If drapey is a word, it's not going to drape like a piece of flannel would. All right, so it tends to be less flexible. There's a little wiggle room in there, but you're never going to get the consistency of a brain tan. And the other thing about brain tan is if you make a coat or a jacket or a shirt or pants or a dress out of it, it breathes like a cotton shirt will. Think about those days when it's a nice low humidity day and you're working or hiking and a breeze comes by and that just feels so good as it evaporates when the breeze comes through that fabric. That's not what's going to happen with a veg tanned hide. Everybody with me so far? So there's a little bit of difference there. Okay, here are some of the things that people made historically and today, currently, out of veg tanned hides. A lot of our veg tanned products are made with cattle hides. Now you can tan deer hides and other stuff, but this is pretty common. And you can see that a lot of these things on here really need to be pretty tough. If I was going to have a watch band made out of leather, it better be tough because I'm going to tear it up. I just have a gift for that. So that's the kind of stuff that you would make with veg tanning. Now here's some historic bark tan information from old publications. I like to read old-timey stuff. And here's a publication that dealt with tanning from the 17 and 1800s that was republished in 1968. Here's a couple things to point out. Hemlock was preferred in the north, oak in the south and mid-Atlantic. And then they mentioned that tanners generally used a blend of hemlock and chestnut and oak. So it's not an either-or kind of a thing, like, oh, you have to use oak, nothing else. No, you can get kind of a happy medium kind of a thing by mixing up your tannins. You get different products with different qualities. Now I want to point out something here. This one says, if one hide was tanned entirely with chestnut, this is American chestnut, the leather would be hard and would crack easily. Now, since I have taken a class on this, I have discovered that that is not necessarily 100% the case. Keep in mind, they were using cowhides, and they would tan these for months at a time because cowhides are incredibly dense, very thick, and it's going to take some time. I think that process they used influenced the product they had. You can change your process, especially with a deer hide, and get a slightly different product, if that makes sense. So, you got to keep in mind this stuff is pretty important. I want you to notice this peeling of bark for tanning. That has to be done off of a recently live tree. That became really important in my project process here. I didn't understand that, and it caused me some grief. Okay, there's another phrase I want you to be aware of called making weight, and it's going to come into the next slide that I show. I want to make sure that you understand, if you have a hide, and you weigh the hide before you ever do any tanning with it, and you get a weight, when you're done tanning it with the veg tan process, it will be approximately 20% heavier because of all the tannins that have gone in and attached to the collagen. And there's ways to even make it more dense and more tannin get in there, adding acid and things like that. There are things that you can do to make that way heavier and make weight. And when you do that, that becomes even tougher. So if you're going to use that for protection, like a set of chaps, or you're using it for protection so that if you were to have an accident, that's something that would prevent you from getting injured, that's the kind of leather you want, one that has made weight. Everybody with me so far? Alright, so let's read this quote here. There was a method developed to extract tannin from the wood of European chestnut in concentrated form. So here's what they did. They would cook the wood and the bark, and then they would take all that cooked water, pour it off, and then they would spray it on a tray, a huge flat area, let that dry and evaporate, then they would sweep up all that dust, and that extract was what they would use to tan a hide. Now here's the beauty of it. Because it weighs less, they can ship that now to anywhere across the ocean, in the country, and you can use that for tanning anywhere you want. You don't have to have near as much space, and you don't have to have near as much weight of your product. But here's the better thing about it. When you use that extract, you can now get a concentration of tannins that's exactly what you want. Now hold on to that thought, and I'll explain that in a bit. Read that next quote. The principal characteristics of tannins of chestnut wood extract are its quality of imparting firmness and solidity to leather and its capacity to make weight. To get a thick and tough piece of leather, that's something you should expect out of a chestnut. Now this is not only the European chestnut, which they discovered, but the American chestnut right before the blight hit. Everybody with me? Okay, we're going to keep going. Alright, so European chestnut tannin. I did tan a hide. Now let me stop here for just a minute. When I tried to learn how to do this, I read that quote in the newspaper about, well, chestnut and Chinquapin kind of have the same amount of tannins, and you can do the same thing with them. So I set out on a journey of figuring out how to do this. And here's what I found. You can find a book that has all this information on brain tanning, and they will have one chapter that says, oh, bark tanning was done too. And they might have two chapters where they would just kind of give you a rudimentary idea of what was done, which is fascinating to me because people do home brain tanning, and very few people do it on a factory level. But a lot of companies do factory level bark tanning, but hardly anybody does it on the homebrew side. So it was very difficult to find this. I read all the books available, I read all the internet stuff, I watched all the YouTube, and I did an experiment, and I'll show you the results here in a moment. But what really helped me was going to Matt Richards' class online, Zoom class, Traditional Tanners. If you want to learn how to bark tan, that's the class. That will take all the mystery out, you can figure it out and move forward. So I was real impressed with that, and that's what equipped me to finish this project and yield what you see on that table. so the American chestnut, I did some research, and some old tiny books were telling me that American chestnut bark would have 6 to 11% tannins, 20 to 25% from the wood, and 10 to 13 from burrs. So that tells you can use different parts of the tree to get different amounts of tannins to tan your hide. Sounded pretty good, right? And if you just put it in there for a few months, you should have ready-made leather. That was what I thought. Now, I did a little extra research just to kind of get an idea of what I'm dealing with. If you use oak bark, fir bark, willows, chestnut oak, you're going to get a variety of different tannin amounts. Same thing with different types of wood. Chestnut and Osage orange have a high amount. Oak, not so much. Even though those acorns are bitter as gall, they don't have a lot of tannin in the bark or the wood. Now, they have some. Don't get me wrong, but it's not enough to tan a hide. It's really not. And then, as I said, that acorns are very bitter. Has anybody here eaten acorn bread or acorn pancakes? Okay. If you do that, you're not going to just grind up raw acorns, because that's going to be nasty, and if you eat enough, you're going to vomit, assuming you can choke that down. You have to remove the tannins, or that's not going to work out too well. Red oak acorns, that group, has higher content of tannins than the white oak acorns do. But when you do that wash, you can use that to tan a hide. Isn't that cool? And then after you've done that, you just will eat the acorn mash because you did all that work. Why not, right? Okay, so here's what I decided to do. I had access to some ethically sourced Ozark Chinquapin tree parts. Now the birds are pretty simple. They're about to fall off, or I pull them off and I put them in a bucket or a tub, and I get all the seeds out of there, no big deal, right? And I can harvest those every single fall. No harm to the tree, cool deal. The bark's a little different story. If you take bark off, that's going to kill the tree. So if we had to take limbs off of a tree for maintenance, that would be what I would then use to shave the bark off. However, the older the bark is, the more tannin it has. So a bigger tree with larger, thicker bark has more tannin, and that's an issue. Well, I don't necessarily want to go out and get a big tree. So I would get trees that have died due to drought or storm. And there was an issue with that I didn't realize, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. Wood shaving, same thing. I don't want to cut a tree down just for the wood. So I did get what I could, ethically sourced trees that were already dead or came down in a storm or drought, and I had a lot of people that helped me. So these folks were giving me the product I needed to tan these hides, and I did an experiment, which resulted in failure. I put these in a tub, and I did exactly what I learned from the internet and the little small chapters, and 3 months into this, I pulled them out, and they stink. Now, let me tell you something. You don't live with my wife, but I do. As soon as I discovered that I had a tub full of bark and hide that smelled, I was in panic mode. I had to get that outside. Now, it was full on 10 degrees below zero, and I'm trying to get this out of the house and make the house smell better. And, well, okay, that's my problem, not yours. All right, so here's what I created. I created rotting rawhide that was dyed black. Now, I shared it with some folks, thinking, hey, I did it, and then I dried it out. I mean, you could hold it out stiff like this. It was like a table. This was not leather. This was rawhide that was black. The other one that was in the bark was rotted, and it was horrible. So, okay, so then I went into pout mode, because I do want to find out what's going on. I do want success, but man, there was a lot of work that went into this. And I'll show you just a smidge of what work went into this so that you can appreciate what it took. I had to do this more than one time to get to where I am. But you know what? That's okay, because there are a lot of discoveries that have been made like that. All right, so I later figured out what I did wrong. I took a class from traditional tanners. I figured it out. I still had wood shavings left, and I still had burrs left. I did not have enough bark. And besides, the bark wasn't good in the first place, and I'll tell you why. All right, so when you cook that, you start to see that foam. That is an indicator of tannins. Ha ha ha, eureka. Now I'm starting to get a picture here. All right, so getting that extract is pretty important. Like I said, it cuts down on the shipping weight, and you can make exactly the concentration you want. Did you know there was a device that will measure tannins for you? It is called a barkometer. Now, you don't think I'm making that up. I told that to some friends of mine, and they laughed and laughed and said, you're full of it. Now, I had to go pull it up on the internet and show them, I bought this.
I think you can buy those in a pet store, too.
So this barkometer will tell you specific gravity of the solution. solution that you have, and essentially it's telling you how many tannins are suspended in the solution. That barkometer was my salvation. A $40 investment allowed me to succeed, whereas before I had failed. All right, so here's a hide that I did with European chestnut extract. It's this big one right here. And by the way, one of the other major differences between tanning a hide, brain tan versus veg tan, I want you to notice that this side looks radically different from this side. This is the flesh side that would have been on touching the inside of the deer. This is the part that used to have the hair. All I did was remove the hair, and I did not take off the epidermis. It's slick and smooth. On a brain tan hide, it looks the same this side as it does on this side. And that's because I scrape off all of that epidermis along with the hair. So this gives me a very different product. It's also a part of the reason why it can be so drapey. It's much thinner and you don't have that tough grain on there. So I think that was a pretty good success. I was able to use that, get exactly the barkometer I needed, which needed to be between 10 and 20. And that's the stuff you put it in your mouth, you're going to go, oh, what did I just do? It's nasty. But if you don't have a barkometer, that's one way you can do it. All right? So, American chestnut and Ozark Chinquapin are supposed to have similar rates of tannin, so I tested it. I started cooking this stuff, and I recorded what I had. So if you're curious, Ozark Chinquapin burrs, I got anywhere from 1 to 5%. Ozark Chinquapin wood, 4 to 10%. I even did the leaves just for kicks, and I kind of almost got a 1 if you squint, and I'm not 100% sure. I can look at you all in the eye and say that. And then the bark, I'm going to have to go back. Now, I want you to notice the wood and the bark really, well, okay, the wood does not look like Ozark Chinquapin. That was what, up in the 20s? Here's why that's so much lower, I think. It got rained on. If you have wood that is not alive and is not having its tannins constantly replaced biologically, those tannins are being leached out as soon as it gets rained on. The bark, the wood, the burrs, all of that loses tannins. You get 3 rainstorms on that, you probably have dropped the tannin content in half. Some of what I collected had been rained on several times. Some of it, I remember I got a piece of wood from Steve and it rained on me the whole trip home. And I had 5.5 hours in a rainstorm and that tannin was dripping on the road as I drove along. And I didn't realize it. So even though this is my results, I don't think this is good information. Now I did do a recent batch of burrs and I got 5 to 6 on the burrs, but I didn't test them for right now. I did it in the middle of summer. So I think there could be a difference in what the burr tannin content is based on timing. A little more experimentation is needed. So I want to say this very firmly. You have got to have fresh material. You have to have fresh bark, fresh wood, and you have to have fresh burrs. If you can't do that, you're going to have to cook a bunch of material, cook it down, and then use it as a concentrate to simulate using an extract. Everybody with me on that? That's what spelled success. The amount of tannins matter. So I'm not going to go cut down an Ozark Chinquapin tree fresh just so I can tan a hide. I've got other stuff I can use. But what I'm trying to demonstrate here is you can do it. You can, and I did. And I'll show you that. Okay, so here's the process, and I'm going to go through this a little faster. I don't think all of you in here are going, oh, teach me how to tan hides. That's not what I'm here for. I just want you to understand what I went through to do this, not that I want you to feel sorry for me or think that I'm amazing, because neither one of those are my goal. I want you to see that this plant, this tree, is valuable. That's my goal. So, let's talk about what it takes to tan a hide with Ozark Chinquapin. First things first, I don't care what kind of tanning you're doing, you have to remove the hide from the deer, in this case, and you have to remove all the connective tissue, the fat, and the muscle. When I say all, I mean most. It doesn't have to be perfect, because I'm going to scrape that at least 4 more times through the process, and when I get done, I'm going to sand it. So it doesn't matter if I do it perfect, because the sanding is going to take care of that. Okay? So then I'm going to lime it. Now there's different ways to lime this. I'm going to tell you my method because I am a busy person and I'm a hillbilly. I use hydrated lime. Now I can use wood fire ash, and you can read up on that, but I used hydrated lime because I can put hydrated lime in the water in a super concentration, like when you're making sweet tea and you put too much sugar in there. That's how I'm going to do this hydrated lime, because here's the deal. I can't over-lime the water with hydrated lime. It's going to be the exact pH that I need, and it doesn't go over. So just tuck that away. I'm going to use it, and then when I get done after soaking it for a few days, I pull that out, and I'm not kidding. I put my gloved hand on that hide, and I can push the hair off that hide. It takes me about 10 minutes. It's marvelous. Okay, so once I've done that, now I need to get the lime out, and I need to get a lot of the mucus in between the collagen fibers of this hide out. And the way I do that is I go find a stream. Now I want you to understand, hydrated lime is a natural product. You don't want it in high concentrations on your lawn. That'll kill grass. Ask me how I know that. I take it down to a local stream, I put a rock on it, and I let it soak in the stream for 24 hours. I am not doing anything evil. There's already calcium in that water because of the limestone where I am. So after I've done that, and by the way, I could use a pond, or I could just keep changing buckets of water, or I could have a little hose on it going for a few days. That's the way to get all that lime out, change the pH to neutral, and get that mucus out. Everybody with me so far? Okay, next step. I'm going to do some hillbilly chemistry. Instead of doing something that looks like I need a white lab coat, I'm going to get a bag full of bran, and I'm going to rinse it in a strainer to get rid of all the flour, because I don't want the bacteria that eats flour, because that gives me a different pH, but I want the bacteria that eats bran, and I put that in water, keep it at room temperature, put that hide in there, and over 1 to 2 days, not only do I get a pH of 4.7 to 5, which is perfect for what I want, it expands the collagen, and all that mucus and all that lime comes out, and it all gets neutralized, and it readies the hide. A hide that's been acidified is almost begging, tannins, come on, I want some tannins, I'm thirsty for them. And that's getting it ready for the next step. Didn't know that until I took that class. Okay, so then, when I'm about ready to put this in the brew, I need to make my tannin tea, which means you put it in a pot, and you put as much water as you have stuff. The general rule is, if your hide weighs, I'm just going to make up a number, let's say your hide weighs 10 pounds, you need 10 pounds of plant material to cook to then give you what you need for your tannin tea. That's assuming it's fresh, which I didn't have. But that's what you're going to do. You want that tannin tea for a deer hide, I need about 10 gallons of water that's tannin rich. And the general rule is, if you put your hand down in it, about an inch, you shouldn't be able to see your hand. Well, that works really well on all kinds of veg tanning except for Ozark Chinquapins. I did that, and my barometer reading was 1. Now, if I had that same situation with tan oak bark, I would have been able to see my hand 6 inches down into the solution with a 1% tannin rate. There are other botanical things in the tea that you get from the castaneias that makes it darker and will give you false readings, which I'll tell you more about that too. Okay, now I say boils. I'm not really boiling. 160 degrees. I don't want it any hotter. I don't want to decompose or deteriorate the tannins. But I'm going to cook it. The first batch, I'm going to set aside. The second batch, I'm going to use that to get this going, and I don't want to peeble the surface. The second cooking, or the second boiling, is not going to be as strong as the first one. So I'm not going to have an astringent, strong peeling effect, and I'm able to get the outside tanned, and then I'll let the stronger solution seep into the center. Okay, so here's what I do. So I've got this tea, and I'm going to put the hide in there. Look at the time stamp on this. This is 10 minutes into it. I put that creamy white hide in there, and within 10 minutes, it's already starting to look brown. The places it's not brown are places it was floating above the water, or where it was folded and it was all creamy. So I have to go in there, and every 10 minutes, I need to stir it. And I'll do that for an entire hour. After that, every hour I stir it, pick it up, and put it back in there. And I'm just making sure that it changes position, and I'm getting that totally soaked through, because I want that tannin to seep from the outside to the inside core. Everybody with me so far? Okay. All right, now this is not Chinquapin or chestnut. This is mimosa. I was doing a different hide with hair on, but this one shows really well. Notice the picture on the left. You see how in that circle, you see how the right side of it is darker, and the part that's to the left of it is kind of a creamy color? That tells me that that's not done. Sometimes that isn't always accurate, so I will use an iron solution. Iron solution is really simple. Vinegar and a steel wool pad, let it soak overnight, then you can take a little straw and just put your finger on one end and then drop a drop on there, and then that will respond to the tannins and make black. So where you see black, it's tanned. Pretty simple, right? Until you get into Ozark Chinquapin. Here's what I discovered with not only Chinquapin, but also the European chestnut. On this one, do you see how that center section, right about there, see that? How that center section's not real dark? It's not done. But look at the iron test. On this one, the iron test says, yep, you're done. don't trust it. So what I have learned is use the cut test. The cut test is, I'm going to cut a little section off the neck, and it's not very big, maybe an inch strip, maybe a quarter to a half inch wide, and I'm going to look at it, and I might see coloration like this. But what I do is I dry it out. I'll rinse it off. I will put it somewhere, even in the sun, dry it out as fast as I can. And when I get done, if I can move that like it's leather, I'm done. If it's as hard and dry as rawhide, it needs to stay in the solution. That means that core is not done. That cut test works. And it works for everything, but it especially is vital for Chinquapins and chestnuts. Okay, so I also have to scrape the flesh. I do that after I've gotten the hair off. I scrape the flesh side. After I drench it with the acid, with the the hillbilly acid treatment, I do that again. And then after it comes out the tannins, I scrape it again. I want you to notice what I'm using. Again, I'm kind of proud of being a hillbilly. I'm using a mussel shell. The guy who taught me this said, you can use anything. And he goes through this list, and he said, mussel shell. And I went, you got to be kidding me. So I had a mussel shell. You have mussel shells laying around the house, right? Yeah. I do. Okay, so I took one and I did it. And you know what? That is the berries. That is a wonderful hide scraper. I was shocked. So I scraped that to try to get all the connective tissue off that I can. But you notice, it looks just a little bit rough. Well, there's still a little bit of stuff on there. That's okay. Next step, I'm going to oil it. Now this is one of those where I get to use a fancy vocabulary word. I use an emulsifier. Egg yolks are an emulsifier. What they do is they hold hands with the oil and the water. Oil and water don't mix. We all know that. Unless you have an emulsifier. And the emulsifier will take the oil with the water in between the collagen fibers so that it makes it soft and pliable. Or at least makes it possible to do that. So I oil that really well on both sides. I lay it grain side down. And I let it dry for a day or three, depending. After it's good and dry, I am going to sand it. I can use pumice stone, I can use sandpaper, you can even use a kitchen scrub. Again, I'm a hillbilly. Whatever you got, use it. After you've got that nice and soft-ish, you're going to break it over a stake. It's called staking, and you use a staker. I just have a piece of hardwood flooring that was left over from a project, piece of hickory. I rounded it over in both directions, so I wouldn't have any sharp edges. And I just take that kind of like your shoe shining, but you're not trying to do it fast, you're trying to do it with stretchy intent. You're trying to break the fibers and stretch it. If you've ever done brain tanning, it's a 2 to 4 hour process. If you do veg tanning, it's about a 20-minute process. Look at the smile on my face. Yeah, that's kind of nice. Okay, so at this point, you're going to oil it. And there's two ways to do this. One is to use some kind of a homemade deer tallow or beef tallow, neat's foot oil mixture. It's kind of a leather balm. Or you can just use straight neat's foot oil. I've done both. I like it. And by the way, I have a list of how to do bark tanning with Chinquapin, but you can do it with other plants. I have a list of things you would need to use, and then I have a way to make deer tallow so that you can make some kind of a balm like this. So if you want that, I've got this up front, happy to hand that out. Eventually, Leslie's going to have this on the website. It's going to be a history of the tanning, what I did, and then these documents as a PDF. So I want to make sure people have access to that. Okay, so here's the benefits of veg tanning. You have wiggle room for days. I don't know about y'all, but I'm busy. If I've got something where I have to be exactly 3 days in, 2 days the next, 5 days for the next step, I'm probably going to mess something up because I get busy, I'm out of town, I've got things to do. But the thing I love about this, if it says you need to have this in the acid drench for 2 days and you do it 3, you're going to be okay. If you need to have it in the lime for a certain number of days, you're okay if you are one side or the other. The other thing I really like about this is it is less physical work, even though it's more time. And it is non-toxic. Everything I pour out unless it's really, really condensed, is something you can put on your compost pile. You can be certified as an organic tanner using bark tanning methods, because everything that you have is totally organic and it's not something that's going to harm the environment, which I think is pretty cool. All right, so here's some observations from my process. First of all, Ozark Chinquapin Bur hide was way darker. Let me show you this. Okay, this is the one I did. This is the European chestnut. This is the Ozark Chinquapin Burs. Do you notice the color difference? I did not dye this. I did not put iron in anything at all, and it's really, really black. In fact, that failure hide, it looked like I dyed it. And in fact, whenever I put that stuff in the water, it looks super duper dark. It really does. So the Ozark Chinquapin Burs really made a dark hide compared to European chestnut extract. Another thing I noticed, this hide that was done with the wood is just a little brittle. Kind of like what they said about the American chestnut, that's all you use. But that's not what I got from the Ozark Chinquapin Burs. So I really think I need to do some more experimenting with this, but I need fresh material, and I want to use what I've learned and do it right. Now, I may not rush headlong into that, because that may be something I just collect as time goes on. This is one of those things, I can collect material right now, as long as it's fresh, and put it in a shed or in a tub. As long as it dries out properly, I could use it 5 years from now. Kind of cool that way. So that way, if you're collecting, you can collect on the fly. All right, some other stuff that I learned that's worth passing along. Use fresh material. You see this right here? This was after one rain. These burrs were sitting on concrete. We had a thunderstorm, blew them off the tree, and notice all that tannin staining the concrete. Now, if you go back there in a few weeks, that's going to be gone. The storms will wash that away. If there's no rain, it'll stay there. But you have to use fresh material. If you don't use fresh material, I promise you, you're going to end up with some problems. Rain leaches the tannins. Use a barkometer. Cook down a consolidated amount of liquid to do your tanning. Use stainless steel tools. Do not use anything that is straight iron. You will stain your hide, I promise you. Tannins respond to iron by turning black. And if you really want to learn this, and you're not wanting to read all the internet stuff and so forth, go to traditional tanners. I'm telling you, I spent 2.5 years trying to figure this out. And that class was basically a month, and I learned more in that month than I did the 2.5 years. It's fantastic. Some more tips. If you have a barkometer reading of 2 to 7, it's going to take months for that to be tanned, and you're going to have to continually replenish it as the hide sucks up the tannins. If you have a barkometer reading of 10 to 15, you'll be done in a matter of days, less than a week. And that I say with experience. Iron solution tests are good for other types of bark tanning. I do not recommend it for Ozark Chinquapin. Use the cut test. And in summary, Ozark Chinquapin can tan hides into leather. Now, why did I do this? Why was it so important that I do this? Think about it like this. For whatever reason you all are interested in Ozark Chinquapins, it may have a common thread, it may not. But there are some people that are going to stumble onto our website because they're learning about bark tanning, and they find out something about this, and then they're like, what's this Ozark Chinquapin? Well, I just became a gateway drug for them. I just got them interested, hopefully, interested in this. If people are into native plant dyeing, and they run into another part of our website about native plant dyeing, which the tree can and has been used for, well, they're going to get into that and say, well, maybe I want to raise some of these trees so I can make that color. People don't always come to the same conclusions at the same rate or the same way that the rest of us do. I'm actually going to wager that you all are kind of like me in one way, and I mean this lovingly. You're not normal. You are all about Chinquapins. Most of you sat here all day thinking about Chinquapins, listening about Chinquapins, talking about Chinquapins. I love y'all, but you're not normal. I'm not normal. The rest of the public looks at us and goes, how can you talk about one tree all day long? Well, watch me. But if I can hook them into thinking this tree has an additional value, or here's a way to get into that value, I see that as very important. And so whenever I look at these historic ways, there are people that will listen to you about history when they won't listen to you about ecology. But when they value something historically, or because it can provide a hobby or some kind of monetary benefit, then they start to say, well, maybe I do want to restore this tree. The next thing you know, they are learning about conservation and preservation, and it's a hook. So I told you, my goal was not to convince you this tree is valuable. My goal was to convince you this tree is more valuable than you thought. Now, just by a shake or a nod of your head, did I accomplish my goal? All right, thank you. So that's what I wanted to do. So these are some things that I've learned about this. Folks, I would love to talk to you more about this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to call it to a conclusion. Okay, it is the conclusion then. And I'm going to say, I'm going to hang around. You want to talk to me? Let's ask questions, talk, visit. Come up, check this out. See the hides, feel them, touch them, get to know them. If you want the handouts, I'll put these on the other table. Thank you all very much for coming today. Thank you for attending, listening to all these presentations. There's been a lot offered up here, a lot of information. We have a lot of information on our website. We have stuff on Facebook. It's out there. We have experts here in the building today. Make use of that. We're going to have supper, sit down next to somebody that looks interesting and talk to them.